Maria walked into the luxury store with a soft smile on her face. She was not a woman who needed to prove anything to the world. Even though her husband, David, was one of the most successful business leaders in the city, Maria chose to live quietly. She preferred simple dresses over expensive gowns, kindness over pride, and humility over showing off. That day, she wore a plain cream dress with a small handbag, her dark skin glowing naturally, and her eyes filled with calm confidence. The store was filled with the scent of fresh perfume and the quiet hum of soft music. Shiny bags and sparkling jewelry decorated the shelves. Women with expensive clothes and polished shoes walked around, whispering about the latest fashion. Maria looked at a necklace displayed behind the glass, not because she needed it, but because she liked the way the small stones reflected light. To her, beauty was not about price but about meaning. She thought of her mother, who used to wear simple beads and still looked beautiful. While Maria admired the necklace, another woman entered the store. Her name was Clara. Clara came from an old wealthy family and believed money gave her the right to look down on others. She walked with her chin high, her heels clicking loudly on the marble floor. Dressed in a red designer gown and carrying a shiny diamond clutch, Clara loved attention. People often said she looked powerful, but her pride made her presence heavy. Clara's eyes landed on Maria. She saw a black woman in a simple dress standing near expensive jewelry, and her lips curled into a half-smile filled with judgment. To Clara, Maria did not look like someone who belonged there. She assumed Maria was only pretending, maybe even wasting the store staff's time. The shop assistant noticed Clara and rushed to greet her, ignoring Maria completely. Clara enjoyed that, as if it proved she was more important. She walked closer and stood right beside Maria, her perfume strong and sharp. Maria gave her a polite nod and stepped a little aside, but Clara did not like the calmness on Maria's face. Something about Maria's quiet dignity made her feel uncomfortable, as if her own pride was suddenly being tested. "Do you even know how much this costs?" Clara's voice was loud enough for others in the store to hear. Her words were sharp, like a knife wrapped in silk. "People like you should stay where you belong. This store is not a place for pretending." The assistant shifted uncomfortably, but Clara's voice carried too much weight for anyone to interfere. The other customers turned their heads, curious and entertained. Maria's fingers touched the glass gently, and she slowly turned her face toward Clara. Her eyes were calm, not angry, not afraid. That quiet strength only fueled Clara's irritation. "You don't answer." Clara sneered. "Maybe you cannot. Maybe you should leave before you embarrass yourself further." Maria's lips parted slightly, but before she could speak, Clara suddenly raised her hand and, in one sharp motion, slapped Maria across the cheek. The sound echoed in the store, shocking everyone into silence. The assistant gasped, one woman dropped her shopping bag, and even the music playing in the background seemed to fade. Maria stood still. Her cheek stung, but her heart remained steady. She could have shouted. She could have demanded respect. But instead, she took a slow breath, closed her eyes for a brief moment, and stepped back. Her calmness was not weakness, it was strength learned from years of hardship, patience, and dignity. Clara smirked, feeling proud of what she had done. She believed she had shown her superiority. "Next time," Clara said loudly, "remember your place." Maria held her handbag tighter and looked around the store. Some eyes were filled with pity, some with shock, and a few with silent admiration for how she carried herself. She did not want to give Clara more satisfaction by arguing. Without a word, Maria turned and began to walk toward the exit. Each step was steady, graceful, as if she was choosing her own dignity over a scene. The store remained silent until the door closed behind her. Only then did the whispers begin. Some customers whispered about Clara's cruelty, others about Maria's silence. The assistant looked down, ashamed for not stepping in. Clara, however, lifted her chin higher, pretending she had done nothing wrong. For her, it was just another day of showing her power. But what Clara did not know was the truth. The woman she had just humiliated was no ordinary customer. Maria was the wife of David, the billionaire CEO whose name could silence even the proudest voices in the city. She was the woman who had stood by him through struggles, the woman who believed in building life with kindness rather than pride. And soon, Clara's careless action would return to her in ways she could never imagine. Maria stepped into the fresh air outside the store, the city buzzing with life around her. She touched her cheek lightly and looked up at the sky. Her heart was heavy, but she whispered to herself, "Dignity cannot be taken by anyone. It lives within." She walked on, her steps quiet but strong, unaware of the storm about to come. Maria walked back to her car slowly, her hand still resting lightly against her cheek. The sting of Clara's hand had faded, but the weight of the humiliation remained. The city's busy streets seemed louder that day, yet inside her, silence grew like a shadow. She drove home quietly, not letting her tears fall, because she knew tears would only make her heart heavier. Her home was a peaceful place, filled with warmth and light. The wide garden, the gentle colors on the walls, the sound of birds outside, all of it carried a calm that Maria loved. Yet that afternoon, the silence inside the house pressed on her chest. She walked into her room and sat by the window, staring at the flowers David had planted for her. She remembered how he once told her, "Every flower grows strong not because of the sunlight alone, but because of the storms it survives." She pressed her lips together and whispered to herself, "This is just another storm." Still, a tear finally slipped down her cheek. Not because she was weak, but because she was human. That evening, David returned home. He carried the usual brightness in his eyes, the energy of a man who had built his empire through determination. But when he entered the living room and saw Maria sitting quietly, he noticed something was different. Her smile was gentle, but it did not reach her eyes. He sat beside her and took her hand. "Maria," he said softly, "you seem far away today. Did something happen?" Maria shook her head at first, trying to cover the truth. She never wanted to burden David with her pain. She always told herself that part of loving him meant protecting his peace. But David had known her for many years. He could read her heart even in silence. He leaned closer, looking into her eyes. "You don't need to hide anything from me," he said with calm warmth. "If it matters to you, then it matters to me." Her heart trembled. She wanted to tell him, but she also feared his reaction. David was a man of control, but when it came to protecting her, his emotions often burned too bright. Maria did not want anger to rise from her pain. So instead of telling him, she smiled faintly and said, "I am only tired today. Nothing more." David nodded, but inside, he knew something was wrong. He squeezed her hand and decided to wait, trusting she would open her heart when she was ready. He had learned long ago that forcing answers never built trust, it only built walls. That night, when David went to his study to finish some work, Maria sat alone in her room. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. Her cheek no longer showed the red mark, but she still felt it, like an invisible scar. She remembered the way Clara's eyes had looked, cold, proud, certain that she had the right to shame her. Maria thought of all the people in the world who were treated the same way every day, judged not by their hearts but by appearances. The thought weighed on her. Her mind drifted back to her childhood. She had grown up in a small neighborhood where life was simple but not easy. Her mother worked long hours sewing clothes for others, while Maria studied under the dim light of a single lamp. People had often looked down on them because they had little money. She remembered one day when her classmates laughed at her worn shoes. That day, her mother had told her, "Never let their laughter decide your worth. Your worth is in your kindness, your honesty, and the way you carry yourself with dignity." Maria smiled through her tears, remembering those words. Her mother had been right. And that same lesson had carried her through every stage of her life, even when she met David. Back then, David was not yet a billionaire. He was simply a man with dreams and determination. Maria had stood beside him when he had nothing but hope. Together, they had walked through struggles, shared small meals, and built their lives brick by brick. To Maria, wealth had never been about money, it was about love, respect, and the values they shared. Yet today, for the first time in years, someone had tried to strip her dignity in public. Not because of who she was, but because of what she looked like. The memory burned quietly inside her. Late at night, when David returned from his study, he found Maria asleep on the couch. A small tear mark glistened on her cheek. His heart tightened, and he gently covered her with a blanket. He brushed her hair softly and whispered, "Whoever hurt you, I will not let them take away your smile." He kissed her forehead and let her rest. The next morning, Maria decided to hide her pain again. She moved through the day with her usual grace, preparing breakfast and talking with David about his meetings. She laughed at his small jokes, but deep inside, the ache remained. She was protecting him, but also protecting herself. She thought if she kept silent, the memory would fade with time. But silence has a way of speaking louder than words. David noticed how her laughter ended too quickly, how her eyes drifted away when she thought he was not looking. He did not press her, but his heart began to prepare. He knew soon, one way or another, the truth would come out. And when it did, he promised himself, he would stand not as a billionaire CEO, but as the man who vowed to protect the dignity of the woman he loved. The following days passed quietly, but David could not ignore the change in Maria. She still smiled, still carried herself with grace, but her silence spoke louder than words. In the mornings, she prepared his tea and asked about his meetings, but her voice was softer, her eyes seemed distant. At night, when they sat together, she often looked out the window longer than usual, as if she was carrying a weight she could not put into words. David was a man who had built companies, faced investors, and stood strong against competitors. He could handle the storms of business, but the sight of sadness in his wife's eyes unsettled him deeply. He decided he could not let the silence continue. One evening, after dinner, he walked into the living room where Maria sat with a book on her lap. She was not really reading, her eyes were stuck on the same page. David sat beside her and placed his hand gently over hers. "Maria," he said softly, "I have been watching you. You try to hide it, but something is troubling you. Please, don't carry it alone. Tell me." Maria looked at him, her lips parting as if to speak, but she stopped herself. Her heart raced. She wanted to protect his peace, but she also knew he would not rest until he understood. After a long pause, she finally whispered, "It was nothing important, only an unpleasant moment." David shook his head firmly. "If it touched your heart, then it is important. What happened?" Maria closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and let the words slowly leave her mouth. She told him about the store, about Clara, about the cruel words and the slap. Her voice trembled slightly, but she did not add anger to her story. She spoke simply, as if telling him a memory she wanted to let go. When she finished, silence filled the room. David's jaw tightened. His hand, still holding hers, grew firm. He felt a storm rising inside him, a fire burning in his chest. The idea that someone had dared to humiliate Maria, to raise a hand against her, tore through him like a blade. But he forced himself to breathe. He could not let anger control him. He looked into Maria's calm eyes, which seemed to plead with him not to act in rage. "Maria," he said quietly, "why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because," she replied gently, "I knew your heart. I knew you would be hurt more than I was. And I did not want anger to steal our peace. I wanted it to pass like a cloud." David closed his eyes for a moment, fighting back the urge to stand up and storm into that store immediately. But when he opened them, he was calmer. His voice was steady. "No one has the right to treat you this way. Not because you are my wife, but because you are a human being with dignity. Silence may protect peace for a moment, but some wrongs must be corrected, not for revenge, but for justice." Maria touched his arm softly. "Please, David. I do not want you to lower yourself to anger. That woman's pride is her own chain. I have survived worse storms before." He looked at her with admiration. She was stronger than anyone he knew. But he also knew her pain deserved to be seen. "I promise you," he said, "I will not act in anger. But I will not stay silent either. Sometimes the world must see the truth, so it learns what real dignity looks like." The next morning, David sat in his office, the tall glass windows reflecting the city skyline. His mind was not on business numbers but on Maria. He remembered every detail of her story. He could almost see the cruel smirk on Clara's face, hear the cold words she had spoken. He clenched his fists but then relaxed them, reminding himself of his promise not to seek revenge, but to act with wisdom. He called his assistant and asked for a list of names attending the upcoming charity gala. It was an annual event where the city's wealthiest gathered to show their influence and generosity. As he scanned the list, his eyes paused. Clara's name was there. A plan began to form in his mind, not to humiliate her the way she had humiliated Maria, but to reveal the truth in a way no one could ignore. That evening, David shared his thoughts with Maria. She listened quietly, her eyes soft with both worry and love. "David," she said, "do what you think is right. But promise me, do not let bitterness guide you." He smiled gently. "My only guide is love for you, Maria. The world should see who you are, not the way Clara tried to paint you, but the truth of your dignity." Maria lowered her gaze, humbled by his words. She had never cared for wealth or recognition. All she ever wanted was to live with kindness. But she also knew David's heart. When he set his mind to something, he moved with purpose, not pride. Days passed quickly, and the night of the charity gala arrived. The hall glittered with lights, and the air carried the sound of music and laughter. Women in gowns and men in suits filled the room, each eager to display their success. Clara, as always, stood among them, her red gown shining under the chandeliers, her laughter carrying across the hall. She felt untouchable, admired, and powerful. But Clara did not know what awaited her that evening. She did not know that the woman she had once judged in a store, the woman she had struck without mercy, would soon walk through those doors not alone, but hand in hand with the man whose name carried more weight than all the diamonds in the room. And when that moment came, the hall would learn a lesson about true wealth and true dignity. The charity gala was one of the grandest evenings of the year. It was held at the city's largest hotel ballroom, decorated with golden lights, tall flower arrangements, and tables covered with shining silverware. The chandeliers sparkled above like frozen stars. Important businessmen, politicians, and wealthy families filled the hall, their voices blending with the soft music of a live orchestra. Everyone came not only to give but also to be seen. For many, this night was about reputation more than generosity. Clara stood near the entrance, her red gown glowing under the lights. Her diamond necklace caught every sparkle of the chandelier, and she enjoyed the admiring looks from the crowd. She raised her glass and laughed loudly with a group of women who shared her pride. For Clara, this night was a stage where she could show her wealth and power. As she moved through the hall, she greeted people with the confidence of someone who believed she was above most of them. She often repeated the same line, "Charity is a duty for people like us. We must guide the less fortunate." Her words sounded noble, but her tone carried pride, as if she was reminding everyone of her high place in society. Meanwhile, David and Maria prepared quietly at home. Maria wore a deep blue gown, elegant but not loud, her hair tied back gracefully. She looked radiant, not because of the dress but because of her natural dignity. David, in a black suit, stood beside her, holding her hand gently. Maria hesitated for a moment before leaving. "David," she whispered, "I do not like attention. I never wanted to be displayed before others." David smiled softly. "You are not going to be displayed, Maria. You are going to be seen. Tonight, the truth will stand by itself. We do not need to shout. We only need to walk in together." Her heart calmed at his words. She nodded, and together they stepped into their car, heading to the gala. The ballroom grew louder as more guests arrived. When David and Maria entered, heads turned immediately. David was well known, not only for his wealth but for his influence in the business world. Every eye watched him with respect, some with envy. But when people saw Maria by his side, whispers began to spread like ripples on water. "Who is she?" one guest murmured. "She looks familiar," another whispered. "Wait, wasn't she the woman Clara embarrassed at the store last week?" The whispers grew, and soon almost every table buzzed with quiet conversations. Clara herself froze when she noticed David at the entrance. Her smile vanished for a moment, then quickly returned, though not as steady as before. But when her eyes landed on Maria, her heart dropped. She could not believe it. The same woman she had insulted and slapped stood there in front of the whole crowd, walking gracefully beside one of the most powerful men in the country. Clara's hand tightened around her glass. She tried to laugh, but her voice shook slightly. Maria, however, did not look at Clara. She walked with calm steps, her hand resting in David's. She carried no anger on her face, only quiet strength. Her calmness made her presence even stronger. David greeted a few people warmly as they moved toward their table near the stage. Everyone wanted to shake his hand, but most of them could not take their eyes off Maria. They admired her elegance, not because of her dress, but because of the way she carried herself. Clara felt the room shifting. People who once admired her now whispered behind their hands, stealing glances at Maria. The power Clara had always enjoyed seemed to slip away. After dinner, it was time for speeches. The host announced David's name, and the crowd clapped loudly as he walked to the stage. Maria remained at the table, her eyes following him with quiet support. Clara sat stiffly nearby, her face pale though she tried to hide it. David stood before the microphone, his presence commanding attention. His voice was steady, clear, and strong. "Tonight," he began, "we gather for charity. But charity is not only about giving money. It is about giving respect, dignity, and kindness to those around us. What value is there in writing a large check, if we cannot show the smallest kindness to another human being?" The hall grew silent. His words struck like truth carried by the wind. People leaned forward, listening closely. He continued, "I want to remind everyone that real wealth is not measured by diamonds, gowns, or titles. Real wealth is measured by how we treat those around us. No one here is greater or lesser because of what they wear, or what they own. We are equal in dignity." Maria felt her heart swell with pride. She knew these words were not just for the crowd, they were for her. David paused, then looked across the hall. "I would like to introduce my wife, Maria. She is my partner in life, the strength behind every success I have achieved. Many of you may have seen her before, perhaps without knowing who she was. Tonight, I want everyone to know the truth. She is not only my wife, she is the reason I stand here today as the man I am." Gasps filled the room. Every eye turned to Maria, who sat gracefully, her hands folded on the table. Some mouths fell open in shock, others whispered her name. Clara's face turned pale as snow. The glass in her hand trembled, and for the first time in years, she felt powerless. Maria did not smile proudly. She only lowered her gaze for a moment, then lifted her head again with quiet dignity. The truth had been spoken, and it was enough. The ballroom erupted into applause. Guests rose from their seats, clapping not only for David but for the woman who had carried herself with such strength. Maria's eyes grew moist, but she held her composure. And Clara sat frozen, realizing that the woman she had once dismissed in arrogance was far greater than she had ever imagined. The applause continued for several long moments, echoing across the glittering ballroom. Guests stood to their feet, clapping not only for David's powerful words but also for the quiet dignity of Maria. Some people had tears in their eyes, moved by the truth that wealth was not about money but about respect and kindness. Maria sat still, her hands folded in her lap. She felt humbled by the love in the room, though she had never asked for it. She glanced at David on stage, his eyes meeting hers with a soft warmth. In that moment, she knew he had not spoken only for himself, he had spoken for her, for every person who had ever been treated as less. Clara, however, sat frozen in her chair. Her heart pounded against her ribs, her face pale. She could feel the eyes of the crowd on her, though no one had spoken her name. David had been careful, he had not mentioned her. Yet the memory of what she had done in the store burned in her chest like fire. She shifted uncomfortably, wishing she could disappear. David raised his hand slightly, and the room grew quiet again. His voice carried gently, yet with strength. Sometimes, he said, we are given moments that test our hearts. In those moments, we can choose pride or we can choose humility. Pride divides, but humility unites. Tonight, I ask all of us to reflect not on how much we give, but on how much kindness we show in our daily lives. The audience listened in silence. His words touched them deeply, not as a lecture but as a reminder of values many had forgotten in their search for status. Maria rose slowly from her chair. All eyes followed her as she walked gracefully to the stage. The hall grew even quieter, waiting for her to speak. She did not rush. Her steps were calm, her head lifted, her blue gown flowing softly as she joined David. David stepped aside, giving her space at the microphone. Maria looked at the crowd, her dark eyes filled with warmth and strength. She took a small breath and began, her voice gentle yet steady. I am not used to speaking before such a large gathering, she said with a soft smile. But tonight, I feel it is important to share something from my heart. The room leaned in, listening. There was a day, not long ago, when I was reminded how quickly people can judge one another. A stranger looked at me and decided I did not belong. I was spoken to with harsh words, and my dignity was tested. In that moment, I could have responded with anger. But I chose silence, not because I was weak, but because I knew my dignity was mine to keep. No one could take it from me. Gasps moved quietly through the audience. People exchanged looks, many already guessed who the stranger was. Clara gripped her chair so tightly her knuckles turned white. Maria continued, her voice calm but filled with truth. I stand here today not because of wealth or status, but because I have learned that respect is greater than riches. We may all wear different clothes, live in different homes, and hold different positions, but in the end, we all share the same human heart. And every heart deserves kindness. Tears welled in the eyes of several guests. The truth of her words touched them deeply. Maria paused, letting the silence speak for itself. Then she added, if I have one wish tonight, it is this, that we learn to see each other not with eyes of judgment, but with eyes of compassion. That we give not only from our pockets but from our hearts. That is the wealth that lasts. The hall filled with applause once again, this time stronger and more heartfelt than before. Many stood to their feet, moved by Maria's grace and courage. David stepped beside her and took her hand gently. They both stood together, a picture of unity, their presence reminding everyone that true power came not from money but from love and dignity. Clara could not move. Her throat tightened as she watched the woman she had insulted stand before the entire city with such calm and strength. Maria had not exposed her name, had not sought to shame her, yet Clara felt her own actions were laid bare before everyone. It was not Maria's words that condemned her, it was her own conscience. Her friends, who once laughed at her jokes, now looked away. Their admiration shifted to Maria, whose quiet strength shone brighter than any diamond. Clara lowered her eyes, her pride crumbling. After the speech, many guests came forward to greet David and Maria. They praised her words, shook her hand, and thanked her for reminding them of values that wealth alone could not buy. Some spoke of how her message had touched them personally. One elderly man, with silver hair and kind eyes, said, "Mrs. David, you have given us a gift tonight. You reminded us that respect is not for the rich alone, it is for all." Maria smiled gently, replying, "Respect is a gift we can all give freely. It costs nothing, but it means everything." David watched with pride as Maria spoke to the guests. She did not seek attention, yet she became the center of it simply by being herself. Clara finally stood and walked quietly toward the exit. Her steps were heavy, her pride shattered. For the first time, she felt the weight of her actions pressing on her soul. She whispered to herself, "How could I not see? How blind was I?" But even as she left, she carried a small spark of hope that maybe, one day, she could learn the humility Maria had shown her. The night had revealed many truths, but the greatest truth was this: dignity shines brighter than jewels, and kindness holds more power than pride. The gala slowly came to an end, but the echoes of Maria's words remained in the hall. Guests left with softened hearts, speaking quietly to one another about the lesson they had witnessed. Some promised themselves they would treat others differently, others felt humbled by how easily they had judged in the past. Maria and David walked together toward the exit, their hands joined. They had planned to leave quietly, without further attention, but life had another moment prepared for them. Clara stood near the main door, waiting. Her red gown no longer looked like a sign of pride. Her eyes were restless, her shoulders tense. She had thought of slipping away earlier, but her heart would not let her. The words Maria had spoken during her speech had stayed with her, burning her pride but also awakening her conscience. As Maria approached with David, Clara stepped forward. Her lips trembled slightly before she spoke. "Maria," the room grew still again. A few guests lingered nearby, watching closely, sensing something important was about to happen. Maria stopped, her expression calm but unreadable. David looked at Clara with sharp eyes, but he remained silent, letting his wife decide how to respond. Clara swallowed hard. I owe you an apology." Her voice cracked. "The way I treated you that day was wrong. It was cruel. I judged you without knowing you, and I spoke with pride that blinded me. I have lived my whole life thinking wealth gave me the right to look down on others. But tonight, your words showed me how poor I truly am in spirit." A hush fell over the small circle of guests who stood close enough to hear. Maria looked at Clara, her eyes steady and kind. She did not rush to answer. Instead, she let silence settle, giving Clara's words the weight they deserved. Then, with a soft voice, she said, "Clara, your apology matters. But what matters more is not the words spoken tonight, but the choices made tomorrow. We cannot erase what has been done, but we can decide how we live after it." Clara's eyes filled with tears. She had expected anger, perhaps even rejection. But Maria's grace left her speechless. "How can you be so calm?" Clara whispered. "After everything, how can you answer me with kindness?" Maria's gaze softened. "Because kindness is not a gift I give only to those who deserve it. It is a part of who I am. If I let bitterness guide me, then I would lose the dignity I spoke of tonight. And that dignity is too precious to lose." David finally spoke, his tone steady but firm. "Clara, understand this clearly: no amount of money, no amount of status, will ever give anyone the right to disrespect another person. My wife did not need to be my partner, or the wife of a CEO, to deserve respect. She deserved it simply because she is human. Remember that." Clara lowered her head. She could not meet David's eyes. His words struck deep, but they also carried truth she could not deny. Maria reached out gently, placing her hand lightly on Clara's arm. "I do not hold anger against you. But I hope you use this moment to change, not for me, but for yourself and for those around you. Wealth fades, beauty fades, but the way we treat others will always remain." The guests who overheard wiped their eyes quietly. They had expected confrontation, perhaps a public shaming. Instead, they witnessed a moment of forgiveness, a lesson deeper than any speech. Clara finally nodded, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I will try," she whispered. "I promise I will try." Maria gave her a gentle smile, then let her hand fall back to her side. That is all anyone can do, try each day to be better than the last. As Maria and David left the gala together, the crowd parted for them with admiration. They did not walk out as a billionaire couple, but as two people who had reminded everyone of the true meaning of strength and love. In the car, David looked at Maria with pride. "You amaze me," he said softly. "Most people would have answered with anger. But you gave her forgiveness." Maria looked out the window, the city lights passing by like stars. "Forgiveness does not mean forgetting," she said gently. "It means choosing peace over pain. If I held on to bitterness, I would be no different from her." David smiled, holding her hand. "This is why I call you the strongest person I know." Maria returned his smile, but her eyes carried quiet thought. She knew the night had changed more than just Clara, it had touched everyone who witnessed it. And perhaps, in small ways, it would ripple into the city, reminding people to look deeper than appearances. Back at the ballroom, Clara stood alone for a while, wiping her tears. For the first time, she felt the weight of her own pride. But alongside that weight, she felt a strange sense of freedom. She whispered to herself, "Tomorrow, I must begin again." The night had shown her that real strength was not in diamonds or gowns, but in humility and grace. And though the road ahead would not be easy, she knew she had been given a chance to change. The days after the gala felt lighter for Maria. Though the memory of Clara's insult still lingered, it no longer held power over her heart. She carried herself with the same quiet dignity, but now there was a subtle strength in her smile, a peaceful glow in her eyes. The city seemed smaller, calmer, and full of possibility. David noticed the change immediately. Each morning, he would greet Maria with the same warmth, but now their conversations carried laughter, ease, and small moments of joy they had often missed in the busyness of life. He felt proud not because of his status or wealth, but because of the woman beside him. Maria's strength and kindness had reminded the world of values often forgotten, and he felt privileged to witness it every day. One afternoon, David and Maria decided to take a walk through the park. The sun was warm, the air fresh with the scent of flowers and grass. Children played near the fountains, couples walked hand in hand, and birds sang in the trees. Maria held David's hand gently, smiling at the simplicity around her. "Do you ever wonder," she asked softly, "why one person's cruelty can affect so many, even for a moment?" David thought for a moment. "Because it reminds us of what we value. When someone treats others poorly, it shows us what we do not want to be. And when someone acts with grace, it reminds us what we should strive for." Maria nodded. "I suppose that is why Clara's words affected me, even though I know they mean nothing in the long run. But her lesson, in the end, will be for her. And for me it reminded me to always choose peace." David smiled. "Exactly. And tonight, the city knows your lesson as well. You gave everyone a gift without asking for anything in return." They walked in silence for a while, enjoying the comfort of their presence. Even in the calm, David felt a small excitement building. He knew Clara was reflecting on her actions. The woman who had once caused pain was now facing a choice: continue pride or embrace humility. Meanwhile, Clara's life had shifted in subtle ways. She avoided her usual gatherings for a few days, quietly reflecting on her behavior. She began to notice how people reacted differently to kindness, how power meant nothing without respect, and how her pride had isolated her more than she realized. Slowly, she started small, helping others, listening more, and speaking with gentleness rather than arrogance. It was not immediate, and change rarely is. But Clara found a sense of peace she had never experienced before. And although she still carried the memory of her mistakes, she learned that acknowledgement, effort, and humility could lead to personal growth. Weeks later, Maria and David hosted a small gathering at their home, not a grand event, but a quiet celebration of friendship and gratitude. Friends, colleagues, and neighbors arrived, each greeted with warmth. The mood was relaxed, filled with laughter, conversation, and stories. Maria moved through the room with her usual grace, speaking kindly to everyone. Children ran past her, laughing, and she knelt to tie a young girl's shoelace, smiling softly. David watched, his heart swelling with pride. He felt that true wealth was not measured in money but in the way one touches lives. And Maria had done just that. Later, as the gathering continued, David and Maria stood together on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. The glow of the skyline seemed peaceful, gentle, almost like a reflection of the calm that had settled over their lives. "Do you think the world will remember tonight?" Maria asked quietly. David laughed softly. "Perhaps not every detail. But people will remember the lesson. And more importantly, we remember it every day by living it." Maria rested her head lightly on his shoulder. "I am glad the lesson was shared. But I am more glad that we can live it together." David kissed her forehead gently. "Always, Maria. We walk through life together, in peace and strength." As days turned into weeks, Clara continued her journey of reflection and growth. She avoided large crowds and gossip, choosing instead to focus on helping others and treating people with respect. Slowly, those around her noticed a change, not dramatic, but steady and real. For the first time in her life, Clara understood that pride and wealth could not replace human kindness. Maria, meanwhile, continued her quiet life, touching hearts not through money or status but through her actions, words, and compassion. People admired her, not for her dress or her husband's name, but for the way she carried herself with dignity and love. David watched his wife, amazed by her inner strength. He often whispered to himself, "She is the richest person I know, not because of money, but because of her heart." One evening, as the sun set behind the city skyline, Maria and David walked hand in hand through their garden. The air was calm, the flowers swayed gently, and the world felt lighter. They stopped near the fountain, watching the water sparkle in the golden light. Maria smiled softly. "It feels good to end a chapter with peace." David squeezed her hand. "And to start every day together with love." The couple stood in silence, feeling the beauty of the moment. Life had tested them, but it had also shown them the power of dignity, forgiveness, and humility. And as they turned to walk back inside, they carried with them the knowledge that true wealth is measured not by what you have, but by the love, respect, and grace you share with the world. And so, the story ended not with revenge or anger, but with hope, reflection, and the quiet strength of a woman whose dignity could never be shaken.